My wife told me it wasn't her duty to fulfill my desires, so I stopped fulfilling hers. And what happened next destroyed everything we built over 7 years before forcing us to rebuild it from scratch. I never thought a single sentence could end a marriage. But here we are, and honestly, I'm not even sure if what we have now is the same relationship or something entirely different. Let me take you back to the moment everything changed, because understanding how we got here matters more than you'd think. And trust me, this isn't your typical marriage advice story where someone learns to communicate better and everything magically works out. 7 years into our marriage, I genuinely believed we had something solid. We met in college, dated for 3 years before getting married, and those first few years as husband and wife felt like what everyone talks about when they describe a good partnership. I worked as a project manager at a tech company. She worked in marketing at a mid-sized firm downtown, and we had this rhythm where we'd both contribute to the household, split chores somewhat evenly, and actually enjoyed spending time together. But somewhere around year 5, things started shifting in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on at first. It wasn't dramatic, nothing you could point to and say that's the problem, but more like a slow fade where the person you married starts becoming someone you just live with. The changes came gradually, which made them harder to recognize as a pattern until I was already deep in it. She stopped initiating anything, whether that was date nights, physical intimacy, or even just asking about my day. I'd come home from work and she'd be on her phone, scrolling through social media or texting her friends, and when I'd try to engage, I'd get these one-word responses that made it clear she wasn't really present. At first, I figured she was stressed with work because her job had gotten more demanding, so I picked up the slack. I started doing more around the house, cooking dinner most nights, handling the grocery shopping, taking care of our car maintenance, basically anything that would make her life easier. I thought if I could just reduce her stress, we'd get back to normal. But here's the thing about trying to fix a relationship by yourself. You end up building resentment while the other person builds entitlement. Every morning for 7 years, I made her coffee exactly how she liked it, with oat milk and half a pump of vanilla syrup, and I'd bring it to her while she was getting ready for work. It was this small ritual that I thought showed I cared. And for years, she'd smile and kiss me on the cheek and say thanks. Except over the past year, the thank you disappeared, then the kiss disappeared, and eventually, she'd just take the cup without even looking up from her phone. When I planned date nights, she'd agree to go but spend half the evening checking her messages. When I suggested weekend trips, she'd say she was too tired. When I tried to be affectionate, she'd tolerate it for about 30 seconds before finding a reason to move away. The bedroom situation became almost non-existent, and I'm not just talking about physical intimacy, though that had dried up to maybe once every 6 weeks if I was lucky. I'm talking about the complete absence of any romantic connection. We'd go to bed at different times, she'd face away from me, and in the morning, she'd be up and out of the room before I even woke up. I tried talking to her about it multiple times, asking if something was wrong, if I'd done something to upset her, if there was anything going on she wanted to share. Each time, she'd give me the same answer, that she was fine, just busy with work, just tired, just not in the mood. After a while, you stop asking because you already know what you're going to hear, and honestly, the rejection starts to hurt more than the silence. What really got to me wasn't even the lack of attention, it was the complete absence of reciprocity. I'd still do all the things I'd always done, bringing her coffee, planning our weekends, handling the bills, making sure we had food in the house, checking in on her throughout the day. But she'd stop doing anything for me. Not because she was incapable, but because she just didn't think about it anymore. I'd mention I had a big presentation at work, and she'd forget to ask how it went. I'd tell her I wasn't feeling well, and she'd say that's rough before going back to her phone. I'd cook dinner, and she'd eat it without comment, then leave her dishes on the counter for me to clean up later. It felt like I'd become her personal assistant instead of her husband, like my entire purpose was to make her life comfortable while she gave nothing back. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in October, and I remember the exact date because it was the day everything I thought I knew about my marriage got flipped upside down. I'd had a brutal day at work, the kind where everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and I'd spent 9 hours putting out fires and dealing with a client who threatened to pull their contract. All I wanted when I got home was some basic human connection, maybe a hug, maybe just someone asking if I was okay. I walked through the door around 7:30, exhausted, and found her on the couch in the same position she'd probably been in since she got home an hour earlier, scrolling through her phone with the TV on in the background. I sat down next to her and tried to decompress, talking about my day, explaining what had happened with the client, and she just kept scrolling. I could see her eyes weren't even leaving her screen, She was looking at Instagram or TikTok or whatever, double tapping and swiping while I was literally pouring my heart out about a situation that was stressing me out. After about 5 minutes of talking to essentially nobody, I stopped mid-sentence and just sat there in silence, waiting to see if she'd even notice. She didn't. Another 3 minutes went by before I finally said her name, and she looked up with this annoyed expression like I'd interrupted something important. I told her I felt like a roommate instead of a husband, that we hadn't had a real conversation in weeks, that I couldn't remember the last time she'd shown any interest in my life or my feelings. I wasn't angry when I said it, just honest, just tired of pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. And that's when she said the words that would change everything between us. She looked at me with this completely flat expression, no emotion, no warmth, nothing, and said, "It's not my duty to fulfill your desires. I'm not your entertainment." The way she said it, so casual, so matter of fact, like she'd been thinking it for a while and was just now bothering to tell me. It wasn't even said in anger, which somehow made it worse. It was just this cold statement of fact, like she was informing me of a policy change at work. I sat there stunned, trying to process what I'd just heard, because surely she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But when I looked at her face, waiting for her to soften it or explain what she really meant, she just went back to her phone. That's when it hit me. She absolutely meant every word. In her mind, she had zero obligation to consider my needs, my feelings, or my happiness. I was just this person who lived in the same house and occasionally bothered her with requests for basic human decency. Something shifted in me right then, not anger exactly, but this crystal clear understanding that I'd been playing a game where only I knew the rules. I'd been operating under the assumption that marriage meant partnership, that we were supposed to care about each other's well-being, that making your spouse happy was something you did because you love them. But she'd just told me, in the most direct way possible, that none of that applied to her. She didn't owe me anything, not her time, not her attention, not her affection, nothing. So I decided right there, sitting on that couch while she scrolled through her phone, that if those were the rules she wanted to play by, then those were the rules we'd both play by. If it wasn't her duty to fulfill my desires, then it sure as hell wasn't my duty to fulfill hers. If she didn't owe me her attention, I didn't owe her mine. If she wasn't my entertainment, I wasn't her servant. Fair is fair, right? The next morning, I didn't make her coffee. For the first time in 7 years, I made myself a cup, drank it, and left for work without bringing her anything. When I got home that evening, I didn't ask about her day, didn't cook dinner for both of us, just made myself a sandwich and ate it while reading on my phone. She looked confused, kept glancing at me like she was waiting for me to snap out of it and return to normal, but I just treated her exactly how she'd been treating me. And honestly, for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. What my wife didn't understand when she told me it wasn't her duty to fulfill my desires was that I'd been running our entire household on the assumption that we were a team, and the moment she declared we weren't, everything I'd been doing for her became optional. The first week of living by her rules was almost liberating in a weird way, like I'd been carrying this massive weight for years, and suddenly someone told me I could just put it down. No more trying to guess what she needed, no more planning things she wouldn't appreciate anyway. No more bending over backward for someone who wouldn't even look up from her phone to acknowledge I existed. She noticed the coffee thing first, obviously, because that had been such a consistent part of her morning routine that its absence was immediate. The first day without it, she came into the kitchen while I was finishing mine and just stood there, clearly waiting for me to offer to make her one. I rinsed my cup, grabbed my keys, and told her I was heading to work. She asked if I forgot something, and I said nope, I had everything I needed. The look on her face was priceless, this mix of confusion and disbelief, like surely I'd just made an honest mistake and would fix it tomorrow. But tomorrow came and went, and so did the next day, and the day after that, and each morning, I made exactly 1 cup of coffee. The meals were next to go. I'd been cooking dinner probably 5 nights a week, usually something she liked, always making enough for both of us, and then cleaning up afterward while she went back to whatever she was doing. Now I made food for myself, portioned for one person, and ate it whenever I felt like it. Sometimes I'd cook at 6, sometimes at 8. Didn't matter because I wasn't coordinating with anyone else's schedule. She'd come home expecting dinner to be ready or at least in progress, and instead, she'd find me eating or already done, with no extra portions waiting. The first few times, she'd ask what we were having, and I'd tell her what I had, past tense, and she'd just stand there processing that I wasn't including her in my plans anymore. After about 10 days of this, she started trying to communicate that she needed things, but in this indirect way where she wouldn't actually ask, just make comments that were clearly meant to prompt me into action. She'd mention she was hungry, or say the house was getting messy, or complain that we hadn't done anything fun in a while. All these little hints that used to make me jump up and solve whatever problem she was implying existed. Except now, I'd just acknowledge what she said and move on. She'd say she was hungry. I'd say that's rough. You should eat something. She'd say the living room needed vacuuming. I'd agree and keep doing whatever I was doing. She'd mention being bored. I'd suggest she find something to do. The really interesting part was watching her try to figure out what was happening. She'd get frustrated and ask why I wasn't doing things I normally did, and I'd use her exact words back at her. I'm just not feeling it right now. Or, that sounds like something you can handle yourself. The first time I said it wasn't my duty to fulfill her desires, she actually flinched, like hearing her own logic reflected back physically hurt. But she couldn't argue with it, because what was she going to say? That I was wrong for treating her the way she treated me? About 3 weeks into this new arrangement, she got sick with a bad cold. Nothing serious, but enough that she felt miserable and wanted someone to take care of her. The old me would have been all over it, making soup, getting medicine, fluffing pillows, the whole nurturing husband routine. Instead, I told her there was cold medicine in the bathroom cabinet and kept working on my laptop. She called from the bedroom asking if I could bring her some water and tissues, and I told her I was in the middle of something, but she knew where we kept both those things. I could hear the genuine shock in her silence, like she couldn't believe I'd actually refused to help her when she was sick. Later that evening, she dragged herself out to the living room looking absolutely pathetic, wrapped in a blanket with red eyes and a box of tissues, clearly hoping the visual would guilt me into caretaker mode. She sat down on the couch next to me and said she felt awful, really emphasizing how sick she was, and I nodded sympathetically and said that was unfortunate. She waited for more, for me to ask what she needed or offer to do something. And when I just went back to watching TV, she actually said, "Aren't you going to take care of me?" And I looked at her, completely calm, and told her I wasn't really in the mood to go out of my way tonight, that it sounded like her problem to solve. The look of betrayal on her face was something I'll never forget. This moment where she realized I meant every word and wasn't going to cave just because she was suffering. Her birthday came about a month into this experiment, and that's when things really escalated. For our entire relationship, I'd always made a big deal out of her birthday, planning surprise parties or special dinners, getting thoughtful gifts, making sure she felt celebrated. This year, the day came and went like any other Tuesday. I said happy birthday when I saw her in the morning, same tone I'd used to comment on the weather, and that was it. No gift, no plans, no cake, nothing. She kept dropping hints all day through text, saying things like, "Can't believe I'm another year older," and "Wonder what today will bring." And I'd just respond with generic stuff like, "Time flies," or "Hope you have a good one." When she got home that evening, she walked through the apartment clearly expecting something, looking around for decorations or hidden presents or any sign that I'd been planning a surprise. Instead, she found me on the couch reading, and the disappointment on her face was so intense it was almost cartoonish. She stood there for a solid minute before finally asking if we were doing anything for her birthday, and I looked up from my book and said, "Oh, did you want to do something? I'm pretty tired from work, so I'm just going to stay in, but you should definitely do whatever you want." She actually teared up, said this was her birthday and it mattered to her, and I shrugged and told her that was nice, but I just wasn't feeling up to making a big production out of it. That's when the manipulation tactics started coming out in full force. She cried, which normally would have destroyed me, but I cried plenty of times over the past year when she ignored my needs, and it hadn't moved her at all. She accused me of being cruel, of punishing her, of not loving her anymore, throwing out every emotional appeal she could think of. I stayed completely neutral, explained that I wasn't punishing anyone, just living by the same rules she'd established. If her needs and desires weren't my responsibility, then mine weren't hers, and that was apparently how she wanted our marriage to work. When the emotional manipulation didn't work, she tried to bring in reinforcements. Her sister came over for what was clearly a planned intervention, cornering me in my own living room to explain how I was being unreasonable and hurtful. I listened politely and then asked if she'd heard what my wife told me that started all this, about how it wasn't her duty to fulfill my desires. Her sister stumbled over that one, tried to say that was different somehow, and I asked her to explain how. She couldn't, because there wasn't a difference, and eventually, she left looking uncomfortable. Her mom tried next, calling me to have a concerned talk about how her daughter was so unhappy and confused about why I'd changed. I explained the whole situation, told her exactly what her daughter had said to me and how I was simply matching that energy. Her mom got quiet for a long time before saying maybe they both needed to think about things, which was not the response my wife had been hoping for. The financial situation brought everything to a head. We'd always had shared finances, both our paychecks going into one account that we used for bills and expenses. She'd been making some larger purchases lately without discussing them with me, just buying whatever she wanted and figuring the money would be there. So I opened a separate account and started having my paycheck deposited there instead, only transferring my half of the bills to the shared account. When she noticed and asked what I was doing, I explained that I was managing my own finances now, same as she managed hers, and if she wanted to buy things, she should use her own money. The panic that crossed her face was immediate and real, because suddenly she was looking at her actual income without my subsidizing her lifestyle, and she realized she couldn't maintain the apartment we lived in, the car she drove, or the spending habits she'd developed. She tried one last power play, probably thinking it would snap me back to my old behavior. She looked me dead in the eye and asked, "Maybe we should just get divorced." Not as a real question, but as a threat, expecting me to panic and beg her to stay and promise to do better. Instead, I thought about it for maybe 3 seconds and said, "Okay, that sounded fine. We could start that process whenever she wanted." The color drained from her face. She'd played her trump card expecting me to fold, and instead, I called her bluff, and now she had no idea what to do. She packed a bag 2 days after I agreed to the divorce, said she needed space to think, and went to stay with her sister across town. I could tell she expected me to stop her, to have some big emotional moment where I admitted I'd been wrong and begged her not to leave. Instead, I helped her carry her suitcase to her car and told her to take whatever time she needed. The confusion on her face was almost sad, like she kept waiting for the script to flip back to normal and couldn't understand why it wasn't happening. She sat in her car for a good 5 minutes before actually leaving, probably hoping I'd knock on the window and break down, but I just went back inside and made dinner for myself. What she didn't know was that I genuinely meant it when I said okay to the divorce. I wasn't playing some elaborate game of chicken or trying to manipulate her into changing. I'd simply reached the point where I'd rather be alone than be in a one-sided marriage. And if she wanted out, I wasn't going to fight to keep someone who'd made it clear they didn't value me. The peace I felt that first night alone in the apartment was telling. No anxiety, no sadness, just this quiet relief that I didn't have to perform for someone who wouldn't even notice. She stayed at her sister's place for almost 2 weeks, and in that entire time, I didn't call or text once. I figured if she wanted space, I'd give her actual space, not the fake kind where you're still checking in constantly and undermining the whole point. I went about my life, worked, went to the gym, met up with friends I hadn't seen in months because I'd always been too busy catering to her schedule. Honestly, I started remembering what it felt like to just exist without constantly monitoring someone else's mood or needs. Apparently, my silence was driving her crazy. Her sister told me later that she'd been checking her phone obsessively, waiting for me to reach out, getting more anxious each day when I didn't. She'd expected me to crumble without her, to realize I couldn't function, to come crawling back. Instead, she was sitting at her sister's apartment realizing that I was doing absolutely fine, maybe better than fine, and that reality was hitting her harder than anything I could have said. Her sister, to her credit, wasn't feeding into the victim narrative my wife was trying to build. About a week into the stay, her sister apparently asked her a simple question that changed everything. She said, "So he's treating you exactly how you treated him, and you're upset about it. Do you not see the irony in that?" My wife tried to explain how it was different, how her situation was justified, how I was being cruel, but her sister wasn't buying it. She pointed out that my wife had spent months ignoring my needs, dismissing my feelings, and explicitly telling me she had no obligation to care about my happiness. And now she was falling apart because I'd taken her at her word. That conversation apparently broke something open, because suddenly my wife was being forced to look at her own behavior from the outside, and she didn't like what she saw. Her sister asked her when was the last time she'd done something nice for me without being asked, when was the last time she'd initiated intimacy or planned a date, or even just asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. My wife couldn't come up with examples, because there weren't any, and sitting with that realization was uncomfortable enough that she couldn't hide from it anymore. She came back home on a Thursday evening, no dramatic entrance, no demands, just walked in quietly and found me reading on the couch. She sat down on the other end, didn't say anything for a few minutes, and then finally admitted she'd been wrong. Not wrong about one specific thing, but wrong about everything, about how she'd been treating me, about what marriage was supposed to be, about thinking she could just take without giving and expect me to be okay with it forever. I didn't immediately accept the apology, didn't rush to comfort her or tell her it was all fine now. I just said that theories and realizations were great, but I needed to see actual change in her actions, not just words. The next few months were basically her proving she meant what she said. She started doing the small things again, making me coffee in the morning, asking about my work, actually engaging in conversations instead of staring at her phone. She'd initiate plans for us, suggest things we could do together, put actual thought into making me feel valued. The physical intimacy came back gradually, and for the first time in years, she was the one initiating it, showing me she actually wanted that connection instead of just tolerating my attempts at it. But here's the thing, I didn't trust it at first. I'd been burned too many times by temporary improvements that lasted a week before she slipped back into old patterns. So I kept my emotional distance, stayed friendly but guarded, continued living somewhat independently even as she tried to rebuild what we'd had. I needed to see consistency over time, not just a short burst of effort followed by regression. About 2 months in, she had a stressful week at work and started slipping back into her old behavior, getting short with me, spending more time on her phone, seeming annoyed when I tried to talk to her. The old me would have absorbed it, made excuses for her, kept trying harder to make her happy. Instead, I immediately mirrored it back, became less available, stopped doing the extra things I'd started doing again. She noticed within 2 days, and instead of getting defensive or pretending nothing was wrong, she actually caught herself, apologized, and explained she'd been letting work stress affect how she treated me. That moment was huge, not because she'd been perfect, but because she'd recognized her own backsliding without me having to point it out, and she'd corrected it immediately. It showed me she was actually paying attention to her behavior and cared about fixing it, rather than just going through the motions until I forgave her and things went back to how they were before. We had a long conversation about 6 months after she came back, really laying out what we both needed from the marriage and what we were willing to give. I told her I wasn't interested in going back to being her servant, that I needed an actual partner who contributed equally to our relationship, emotionally and practically. She agreed, said she understood now what she'd been doing wrong, how she'd taken me completely for granted and expected me to just accept being treated like hired help instead of a husband. We set some actual ground rules, stuff we probably should have talked about years ago, but had just assumed we were on the same page about. Things like making sure we both initiated quality time together, that we'd check in with each other about big purchases or decisions, that we'd actually communicate when something was bothering us instead of going cold and expecting the other person to read our minds. Basic partnership stuff that somehow we'd lost sight of. The relationship we have now is different from what we had before, and honestly, that's a good thing. The old version was me killing myself to make her happy while she gave nothing back, which was never sustainable. Now we both put in effort, we both consider each other's needs, we both actually seem to enjoy being around each other. She tells me regularly that she's grateful I didn't just cave when she left, that if I'd gone back to the old pattern, she never would have learned anything, and we'd have ended up divorced anyway within a year or two. Looking back, the whole situation taught me something important about relationships and self-respect. When someone tells you that your happiness isn't their responsibility, believe them, and then act accordingly. Don't kill yourself trying to make someone care who's already told you they won't. My wife needed to see what a marriage looked like when I stopped carrying everything on my own, needed to feel the absence of all the things she'd been taking for granted before she could understand what she'd been doing wrong. Some people might say I was petty or immature, that I should have just communicated better from the start. But here's the thing, I tried that. I tried talking, tried explaining how I felt, tried asking for what I needed. She ignored all of it until I stopped talking and started showing her instead. Sometimes people don't hear words, they only understand actions, and sometimes you have to let someone experience the consequences of their behavior before they'll actually change it. We're still married, still working on things, still figuring out how to be better partners to each other. It's not perfect, probably never will be, but it's real now in a way it wasn't before. She knows I won't tolerate being treated like I don't matter, and I know she's capable of being the partner I actually need. And honestly, that's worth more than the comfortable illusion we were living in before, where everything looked fine on the surface while I was drowning underneath. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.